Hey Joy, can you hear me? It looks like you're connecting, so hey John, hey Joy, can you guys hear me? I believe I have my audio turned up. John, it looks like you're on mute. Can anybody hear me or can I hear anybody else? Unmute. John, can you hear me? I don't believe I'm on mute. I am. My speakers are up, but I am not hearing anybody. See if this helps. Hello, can somebody hear me?
Joy can, all right.
Hey Joy, how are you?
Good. I had to do the dial-in again. I don't know why I just don't get it on my iPad, but doesn't matter. I hear you
Okay.
loud and clear.
Well, it shows that your iPad is in the room, but I'm not sure why I can't hear you. So,
I don't know. I pushed that, join audio, and then nothing happens, so I dial in.
okay, awesome. Hey, Pastor Rick, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I can hear you yelling in the next room. So, right. I know Tom Trissler is going to join, and I believe the Burrises were going to join, but Tom may have had to do something with his stepson and the doctor.
Mm.
So I tell you what, we are at 2:32. So let's go ahead and I'll pray and get started, and we'll get into where we're at, which is we're going to be looking at the Song of Psalms today. I'm sorry, Song of Songs, another writing of
Can you
Solomon.
hear me today?
Yes, is that you, John?
Yeah, I just had to dial in.
Okay, yeah. I'm not sure people having to dial in to be able to hear. So let's go ahead and we'll open up in a word of prayer and we'll get started walking through the outline today. Heavenly Father, just thank you for your word and being able to look into your word and to share your word with each other. Lord, thank you for just watching over us and being with us. Help us, Lord, today as we look into this book to just glean wisdom from it and also to make application to our own lives. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's patience. We've taken quite a break. My wife and I both tested positive for COVID back on October 27th. And I think that's about the last time that I think we had a class on that Monday night, and then I started feeling sick the next morning. So I don't think it was the class that caused it, but anyway, so we're back, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will look at the Song of Psalms today. And let me go ahead and there. Can everybody see the outline? There should say the Prophets, Lesson 6, Song of Songs. Joy, can you see that? Or John? Can everybody see the slide? I'm not sure if anybody can see it or.
I see you, Dave. I had to step away.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay.
see it.
All right. Just
I
making
did
sure.
too. I had to go find Neil,
Oh,
but I
okay.
found him.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to look at the Song of Songs today. We are getting back into part 2 of the Grow class. If you can recall, and we'll go back and just do a little bit of review today before we dive into this book. If you remember the first part 1 of the Grow class was looking at the history of the Old Testament. We started with the starting, treaties and tribes, advancement, glory, erosion, and servitude. So the starting was our first section. We looked at the creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel, kind of stuff in the first few chapters of Genesis. So that was starting. We then went to the treaties and tribes a little bit further, kind of starting at Genesis chapter 12 with Abraham. We looked at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and some of the covenants that God made with, starting with Abraham and then his sons. So treaties and tribes. The second, and remember this is the word stages, so S-T-A is the word advancement. That's when we moved into the book of Exodus. We looked at the children of Israel exiting out of Egypt, wandering around in the desert, and finally conquering the promised land in the land of Israel. And then the judges and how Israel kind of advanced under the judges. We do remember how the book of Judges ends. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And so the people began calling for a king. They wanted to be like other nations. So the G of stages is the section of glory, which is the 3 most famous kings of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon. Each one ruled for about 40 years. This was a 120-year period, the glory of the nation of Israel. And then from Solomon, it started to go downhill. The E from stages is erosion. That's when the country divided into north and south. David and his family continued to rule in the south, and it was called the land of Judah. And all the northern tribes became what was called the land of Israel, and so they divided. They dispersed and were deported. Once they were divided and not unified, they became a lot less strong. Their armies weren't as strong, and outside countries, first Assyria took over the north, and then Babylon defeated the south and Judah and destroyed Jerusalem. And then the last part was right at the end of the Old Testament. We looked at servitude, where the people of Israel, the Jews, were able to come back to the Promised Land and kind of reestablish their presence in the Promised Land, but they were always serving some other country. So this was about 400 to 500 years before Jesus came. In this last part of stages, the last part of the history of the Old Testament, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, we looked at them. So that was part 1 of the Grow class. So we looked and moved into part 2. So part 1 covered this history part. And so part 2 is covering poetry and prophecy. And we made it through Job Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes before we took our break. And now we're going to finish up this area of poetry. And then next week, we'll enter into the area of prophecy. So start looking at some of these prophets. And maybe if you remember, we kind of talked about this before, is that you would think that if you were looking at something like chronologically from like start to finish and how the books are lined up in the Old Testament, you would think, well, all these prophecy books must come after the book of Esther, maybe in the history. And that is not what's actually happening here. So these prophets kind of filter in different areas of the history books. Most of them come kind of in this area of First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles. So we'll be getting into that next week when we enter the book of Isaiah. So today we're going to just finish up the poetry section and look at this last book of poetry called the Song of Songs. It's also known as the Song of Solomon. So before we go in, does anybody have any reflections or thoughts on your reading of Song of Songs? We were supposed to, it's 8 chapters and they're all pretty short. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to actually read through it or have any ideas or thoughts. I guess the one thought that I have is this is a bunch of gushy stuff that you'd only tell between you and your wife or you and your husband. That you would just, if you heard people talking like this out in public, you would just say, oh, go get a room somewhere, you know? And so go ahead. I thought somebody had a comment. So, yeah, I mean, some of it I like, I wouldn't want to have to read through this entire thing while we're here today, because some of it I think I would be embarrassed to read. So that was kind of my thought as I was reading through it. But it is the whole book of the Song of Songs. It is just one song. And it is a song that was written by Solomon. And thinking back to the stages, Solomon was the last major king of Israel. He was the son of King David. And it was right after Solomon was the king that the nation divided up into the north and the south. So really, Solomon, his life is kind of a story of the whole nation of Israel. It started off really great. He was very powerful and had everything. And because of idolatry at the end of his life, he kind of fell away from God. And so his life is kind of a picture of Israel. Started off in glory and ended up in idolatry. But it is one song. I kind of looked it up. It would actually take 20 minutes for you to read through it. Of course, we don't have the music, so it's a pretty long song. I thought of the longest song that I ever heard on the radio, and it was this song that came out when I was a kid called American Pie. And it was a #1 hit back in 1972. Does anybody remember that?
I love that song.
All right.
Yep.
I can almost
Bye-bye.
sing it to you.
Bye Bye American Pie, right?
A long, long time ago,
Okay, I'm going to mute Pastor
I
Rick
can
now.
still remember how that music used to make me smile.
All
I'll
right.
stop.
Okay. That was, as far as I know, that was like the longest #1 hit on the radio. That was 8 minutes and 33 seconds long. So this song, which is just one song, this Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, actually around 20 minutes long if you just read through it. Probably would go longer if we had the music to go with it. So 1 Kings 4:32 says that Solomon spoke out 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. So Solomon was a prolific songwriter. The only other song that we have that he wrote is in Psalm chapter 72. That is another song that Solomon wrote that we have that's in the book of Psalms. So this is the second one that we have. So there's at least 1,003 that he wrote that we don't have the words to. And like I was saying when we started, it is sexually explicit. It was actually removed from the Bibles of young priests, like back in the Middle Ages and back when they were training priests for the Catholic Church. So if these guys were going to be celibate and they were not ever going to get married, they didn't want them reading through this Song of Songs. So they would remove it from the Bible of young priests. And its major purpose now is as a song for Jewish weddings. So my understanding is, because I've never been to a Jewish wedding, is they actually read through this entire song at Jewish weddings. And if you read through it, you see that there are sections for the groom to read, sections for the bride to read, and then sections for what's called the friends to read. So it's kind of a responsive reading that they do at Jewish weddings. I don't know if anybody's here on here been to a Jewish wedding or experienced this.
Mm.
No. So anyway, so that's what I'm told. So basic facts about the book of the Song of Songs is that its author was Solomon, King Solomon, and this is the book that he wrote at a young age. So he wrote this before he got lots of wives, and actually probably wrote this before he was even married, but probably engaged to the girl that he wrote the song about. So it was probably written in his early 20s, in his youth, and he wrote Proverbs in his middle age and Ecclesiastes in an older age when he was older. So this was the writing that we have that he wrote when he was a young man, very young, probably just becoming king about the time that he wrote this. So Israel is the recipient, but more than likely, the real recipient was his girlfriend that he wrote this for. So, you know, like one of those love notes that guys write to their girlfriend, or, you know, do you want to go out with me? Check yes or no. Solomon was a little bit more, a better writer, I think, of songs. So I'm not sure if he got a guitar and said, here, I wrote a song for you, honey. But it was written 970 BC, again, early in his life. And the purpose of this, there are many different interpretations to this, but kind of the basic interpretation is that Solomon was in love. He had met a girl that he was in love with, wanted to marry, and wrote a song to her. So maybe some people take it further than that, and we'll take a look at maybe some of those other ways to look at the book. So some feel for the purpose is that it is to explain and praise marital love. So the love between a man and a woman, and to kind of sanctify that marital love between a man and a woman. It's also a reference, it could be a reference, I guess, to God and Israel, and even Jesus Christ in the church. Jesus Christ, you know, is typified as the groom, and the church as the bride of Christ in the New Testament. But I guess, you know, in the interpretation of it, in some ways, reading through this and the kind of way that it is sexually explicit, it's difficult for me, I guess, to use it in trying to reference Jesus Christ in the church. But simply another way to look at the purpose is that is the story of Solomon falling in love with his first girlfriend and his first wife, whose name was Shulamith. And so this is probably the most truthful explanation for the purpose of the book, why we find it in Scripture, because it's all about Solomon falling in love with his first wife. Unfortunately, he had many more wives later in his life, but would have had a lot better life if he had just stuck with Shulamith. So, any thoughts before we move on? All right, so some of the characters in this book, the first one is Solomon. And he is a young king of Israel who has just taken over for his father David, the greatest king Israel has ever had. So he was had a lot of responsibilities at this point. His dad had either just passed away or was very close to passing away, so lost the most important person in his life at this point. So it's almost kind of like the grace of God that Solomon, is in some part of him grieving for the loss of his dad, but then finds the love of his life around the same time. So, it's God is merciful sometimes to us when we have a loss in our lives, that as we're grieving for that loss, he then kind of gives us something else to focus on besides just the grief. So I can just look at that in the last year of my life, losing my sister early in March of 2021, but also having my first grandson about the same time. It's like God was merciful, to me in that. And I think Solomon was kind of at that point in his life where he lost his dad, but now finds the companion, the love of his life. Shulamith is the second character in the book, and she is a vineyard keeper daughter who is a poor working girl with her brothers. So she works at the vineyard with her brothers, and this is how Solomon finds her. And any thoughts, if you've read through this, how we know that Shulamith was a poor working girl? The thought from Scripture is that it says that she has darkened skin or a tanned skin. So back in those days, it's a lot different than now. If you worked outside and your skin was darker and tanned, people knew that you were poor because you had to work outside. You weren't allowed to work inside. And back then, the sign of wealth and the sign of beauty was a more lighter skin without any kind of suntan on it. So that's how we know that Shulamith came from not like a family of wealth or a family of royalty. And so it could have been a little bit of people maybe kind of look down on the fact that Solomon married Shulamith because she didn't come from royalty. And she, just watching some of the trouble that some of the British monarchs get into, that they, are marrying people that are not part of the right family. Solomon kind of did that here too, in marrying kind of a working girl. And then the other group is the friends. So Solomon speaks, and then Shulamith speaks, and then the friends respond. So this is a literary device used to help us grasp the importance of the words being spoken. And it's kind of very similar to, I think if you've ever seen any kind of Greek plays where you've got this chorus that kind of is off to the side of the main event that's happening, and they'll speak at times, kind of, and that's what these friends are in the book of Song of Songs. And then also there's a structure in this book, in the Song of Songs was written as a chiasm. So it kind of comes to, in the middle of the book, kind of a building up. And then, hang on just a second. Okay, sorry about that. So it kind of builds up in A, B, C, D, and then it does the same thing backwards to lead out of the book. So kind of like Humpty Dumpty, we've talked about this before, and how the Psalms, the Proverbs are set up in a certain way, in a certain device. And that's the way this was written here. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It kind of goes in that A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A. It goes to the middle and then it works its way back out. So then you retell the story. If we did it this way, it's a shame that all the people who came together couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together. All the people came together to try. It's too bad that Humpty Dumpty fell from the wall. Humpty Dumpty had started the whole story by sitting on a wall. So it sounds weird to us, but that is the way that Jewish people wrote and how they told stories, and how they remembered things, as they put them into this kind of outline where it led to a crescendo in the middle, and then we're going to walk down the other side of the mountain with our story and kind of start back where or finish up right where we started. So that's kind of how this book is outlined. He said, if you're on page 40 of the notes, the very center where we kind of reach the mountaintop is chapter 5, verse 1, where it says, "Eat, O friends, drink, drink, drink your fill, O lovers." So it kind of comes to the point where they meet, they're married, and this is kind of the wedding and the reception. Eat, O friends, drink and drink. And then it kind of comes back out of that, back to the beginning again. Any thoughts before we kind of get into the last section here? All right. Okay, so the story of the Song of Songs, it's kind of a Cinderella story. It's the story of the king of the country meeting this poor young girl, and Solomon was the king, and he went away for a little bit of rest and relaxation over a long weekend. So he goes off to, I guess, what is called the president goes to Camp David when he wants to take it easy. Solomon went to this vineyard place that he owned as the king. And while he's there, he meets this girl named Shula. And Solomon's not married at that point. She's the vineyard keeper's daughter. And what this really then becomes, the story of this whole book, is kind of like the couple's story on how they met. And people love to tell that story. Some people have like really cool stories on how they met each other. I went back, if you'd ever seen the movie When Harry Met Sally, Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan. At the beginning of that movie, there are like 4 or 5 couples that are probably in their 80s, and they're telling the story of how they met. And they're like, I saw her walking down the street, and she went into this restaurant, and I followed her in there, and when the first time I saw her, I knew that I was going to marry her. And that was 55 years ago, and we've been married ever since. And so this is kind of that kind of story. I found, if you meet a couple, they always like to tell you how they met. And so this is what this book is all about, how Solomon met his first love, Shula. And so the two of them fell in love, and soon Solomon brought her back to Jerusalem, and they get married. And so that's what this book is all about. And then we're told of their wedding night and what it is like to be madly and sexually in love with one another as husband and wife. So it's kind of extolling marriage between a man and a woman, extolling just love between a man and a woman. So then the story is told in reverse, and that's kind of the outline of the book. So methods for interpreting the book is that it could be thought of as an allegory between God and Israel. So how much God loves Israel, Israel loving God back, but then turning its back upon God. Again, it could be an allegory of Christ and the church. Like we said, that the church is the bride of Christ. And it's a wedding song used in Jewish weddings. And it could be also a manual of married love. There are a couple of books that I've seen before that are written by Christians, and they refer in making a good marriage, referring back to the Song of Songs in a number of different ways. So various ways that this book can be used. So some important thoughts of the book is the garden locked up is used in this many times. It talks about a garden, and Solomon refers to Shula as his garden. So she is saved just for him. So it's kind of referring to the fact that Shula was a virgin when they get married. I'm not sure if any youth pastors have ever done the sermons out of the Song of Songs to try to tell the kids in the youth group that they need to save themselves for marriage, but that's exactly what it's saying here, is that the garden was locked up. And I'll read these scriptures to you, the Song of Songs. Chapter 4, verse 12. It says, "You are a garden locked up, my sister, my bride. You are a spring enclosed, a sealed fountain." Verse 15 says, "You are a garden fountain, a well of flowing water, streaming down from Lebanon." And 5:1 says, "I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk." So she's referred to the garden and the garden locked up. And that's kind of, totally against our culture and what we see on entertainment and lots of television shows or movies, that saving sex for marriage is kind of thought of as such an old-fashioned idea. And it's kind of what's being extolled in this book is that, you should wait for marriage before you experience anything sexually. The Hebrews often had gardens attached to their house with a wall around it. There's another scripture, I'm not sure if it's referred to in our notes, but it talks about a woman either being a wall or a door. And so the wall is a woman who will wait for marriage, and it can be referred to both men and women, or a door, someone that opens themselves up before marriage. So that I'm trying to think, I think that's in the last chapter, in chapter 8. So it's the gardens, Jewish gardens were protected from the outside, and neighbors would not consider violating it by going in. Again, so it's just something that's saved between the man and the wife, and no one from the outside should be getting into that garden. It's locked up. So it describes their bodies. Solomon describes his bride from her head down and from her feet up, and Shulamith describes her husband. I'm not going to read those for you. So you can go read those on your own. It talks about the little foxes, and this is an interesting thought that's in this book, is that in orchards, foxes were the enemies to the grapes. Shula myth talks about the little foxes, and she's saying that there are little foxes in the relationship that are beginning to steal their joy. So the whole idea is that these foxes are really small, like compared to, let's say, the garden or the vineyard. But if you don't take care of those little foxes, they can grow up and cause a lot of problem. So, any type of little problem in a relationship should be dealt with. One of the things I've always been taught is that you never go to bed angry, that you always, as a couple, try to talk about or work out, whatever the issue is before you go to bed and go to sleep. Don't allow that issue between you to fester and get bigger overnight and the next day and the next day. Some people tend to use that as a weapon in a relationship, is by, I'm not going to talk to you for 3 days because I'm so mad at you. And so what they're saying in this book is that that can be one of those little foxes that really get in the middle of a relationship, and you should be taking care of those and not letting those little problems roam around in your marriage as time goes on. Deal with them when they come up. All right, raisins and apples are in there, considered by the Hebrews to be the aphrodisiacs. So raisins and apples, I've never thought of that while I was eating my Raisin Bran or eating an apple, but apparently that's the Hebrews, thought those would help you sexually. So we'll move on from there. And the banner is in here. Song of Songs 2:4 says, "He has taken me to the banquet hall. His banner over me is love." And that was a song, I can't remember, that we used to sing at a church I used to go to a long time ago, where his banner over me is love. Anybody else ever sing that song?
Yes.
Okay, good. I thought I was remembering that was a song that we used to sing long time ago. So this verse is
Probably back in the 70s.
yeah, back, Kumbaya, and his banner over me is love.
Right.
Yeah, this verse is a reminder of Solomon's protection and possession of his bride. He is the banner over her, and he will protect her.
Yep.
Go ahead. All right. Lastly is the position for lovemaking. And I don't have the verse for this, but it says, a Song of Songs 2:6, "His left arm is under my head and his right arm embraces me." The word embrace does not mean to hold or hug, but means to fondle. So I'm going to move on from that. Whatever the ultimate purpose of the book is, the Song of Songs does show God's stamp and approval on married love. And you think of it in the New Testament, I believe it's in Corinthians, where it says that a man and a woman should not withhold sex from each other in a married relationship unless it's to spend some extra time in prayer. So just like not speaking can be a weapon in a relationship, withholding sexual love could also be used as a weapon. So it's saying here that God's stamp of approval is on married love. All right. That is Song of Songs. I kind of went through that kind of quick. It does talk a lot about marriage, about intimacy in the relationship of marriage, and can be used also maybe prophetically of Christ and the church, and just the intimacy that can be between a Christian and the Lord. there should be the reverence in that relationship. But I think for me, the application is that I should be in communion and relationship with God on an ongoing daily basis, just like it's important for my wife and I to have communication on an ongoing daily basis. Just like I think she forgot that I was doing this because she tried to call me while we were talking. So I'm gonna have to call her back. But I think that to me is the application here is God wants to have that intimate relationship with us, and that He will bless a Christian marriage. So any questions or comments? Well, I think that's going to be it for today. I hope that this time works out for everybody. It works out, I think, a lot better for me to be able to do it in the afternoon. And just looking at those who are involved in our group, it seemed like everybody was going to be available. So the one thing is we will be doing Isaiah next week. I did mail out for those that I was mailing the outlines out to before. I mailed those outlines out today for Isaiah and also for the answers for the Song of Songs. So those are going out in the mail today. But we will, if it's okay with everybody, just continue to meet on a weekly basis at this time on Monday afternoons.
Thanks, David.
Yes, thank you. Anybody final comments or thoughts? All right, well, we'll go ahead and end it there today.
Thanks, David.
And, yep, thank you. And the recording will be available on the Union Church YouTube. So have a great afternoon, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, David.